Have you ever done a fire drill at your school? You know, when the alarms go off and they're super loud, and you have to work on following directions, finding your nearest exit, and then going to your safe space outside? Or what about the air vents at your school? On a cold day, warm air blows through those vents. And on the flip side, on a hot day, cold air goes through those vents. Even think about your school cafeteria. They have lots of different things to cook your food safely, as well as different cleaning products to make sure they can clean up and again, stay safe and clean. These are just a few examples of inventions and safety procedures at your school to keep everybody safe in different ways. In fact, there are people out there for their jobs who go to different locations to make sure that the inventions, materials, and chemicals are working the right way. And also, they teach and make suggestions to make sure that they are doing what they should in this place. Who would do this for their job? Find out in this episode of the STEM Career Quest. Have you ever found yourself asking this question? What do I want to be when I grow up? Maybe you already have an answer to that. Maybe you don't. Both are okay. Welcome to the STEM Career Quest podcast, a show made for kids like you to help you build your dreams or even find new ones in science, technology, engineering, and math. Each week, hear captivating stories and interviews to explore the exciting world of STEM. Oh, and grown-ups and teachers, you can listen too. We'll talk to experts in STEM who are passionate about what they do in the real world and how they make a positive impact in their careers. Created and hosted by K-5 STEM coach Naomi Meredith, this show will spark your imagination and passions. Join us each week on our quest to explore the possibilities of careers in STEM, one episode at a time. The STEM career that we are going to be hearing about today is what it is like being an industrial hygienist. Industrial hygienists go to different workplaces to analyze or work at different hazards that workers might be exposed to. Then it is their job to educate and come up with different solutions or ways to prevent those hazards. To tell us more about this career, we're going to be hearing from our special guest, Yasmine Daniels. Yasmine is a certified industrial hygienist and federal agent. Along with her career, Yasmine is a PhD chemist, an adjunct college professor, science mentor, speaker, and author. It is so cool to hear from someone who is so passionate about STEM and does so many different things to get kids like you excited about these fields. Can't wait for you to meet our special guest and learn all about this STEM career. Now, get ready for today's episode quest, my little questies. As you listen to this episode, there are 3 questions I want you to listen carefully for the answers. The answers do go in order of the episode, but you have to pay special attention to these details to get the correct answers. And what about those correct answers? I will be revealing those at the end of the episode. Here we go. Question number 1 is, what does Yasmine help protect people from in the workplace? Question number 2, true or false? Yasmine has a special badge for her job. And question number 3, what does Yasmine say is like learning a language? Be a careful listener. Now let's embark on today's episode. Well, thank you so much, Yasmine, for being here today. We are so excited to chat with you. And if you guys are watching the video version, she has a really cool microphone that she is using. It's the coolest microphone I've ever seen. But thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to get started talking about all the fun things we have lined up today.
Perfect. Well, getting started, what is your STEM career and how would you describe what you do?
That's a great question. So, one of the things I like to tell people, especially students, is that STEM is limitless. And what that means is you can do so much with a STEM degree. You can be a teacher, a doctor, an investigator, working in law enforcement, and so on and so forth. And as a matter of fact, if there's time later, I'd love to go over some of the STEM career options that I've included in my STEM children's book called Building My Self Esteem in Science. So, to answer your question, ordinarily, I would tell you that I'm a doctor, but I'm not the kind of doctor who gives you medicine or who sees you when you're sick in a hospital. I work as a chemistry professional, and I've done some really cool science, like using salts to clean toxic water, or making particles that could potentially help canines become super sniffers. Um, but I actually wear so many different hats in STEM. That means I have a few STEM jobs, such as industrial hygienist, adjunct chemistry professor, science mentor. I'm a science writer. I do science outreach and communication. So that just means I do things like judging science fairs, which I just did this past weekend, by the way. I do science demos for schools and organizations. So that's what I do. So it's not really just one short, sweet, simple answer. It's a lot.
I love how you are using your talents and your passion for STEM in so many ways. And I think that's so good for kids to hear because you can be passionate about a lot of things and try different projects and have it all connect together. So that is so awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
So, with what you do, what would you say is the coolest part about your job?
So, if I were to hone in or zoom in on one particular job that I do in STEM, I'll focus for now on industrial hygiene. It sounds like a pretty big, complicated word for people who may not know what it is. Industrial hygiene is someone who works to protect health and safety of workers. And so, basically, what they do is they'll go into a workplace and they'll look to see if there are any hazards that the workers might be exposed to, but they'll also look for solutions on how to prevent those hazards or how to fix them. That's a very general and broad definition, but hopefully someone who's looking in not too familiar will understand exactly what we do. The coolest part about my job as an industrial hygienist is being able to save people's lives. Imagine you going to work one day and not being aware that you're exposed to levels of a chemical that is slowly damaging your health. As an industrial hygienist, my job is to ensure that these things don't happen. And so it makes me feel so satisfied and so fulfilled that I can do that for someone and help them, help to protect them from these types of hazards while they are at work.
That is so incredible that your job impacts people's lives in that way. And some kids out there might think, oh, I would love to help save people's lives, but maybe being a firefighter isn't for me. But there's ways to use science, like what you're doing, to help people in their everyday lives. And there's so many things that people do in their jobs that are probably a result of what you do in your job, and we don't even realize
Absolutely.
it.
Yep, exactly. I like that firefighter analogy. That's so good. But yes, I totally agree.
Yeah. So along with that, um, do you have a cool project that you worked on or a funny story or something that you would love to share with us?
Let's see. I have a lot of cool stories, but the one that I like to share with students is when I tell students that I'm a Fed, I like to tell them the story about what I thought a Fed was when before I became a Fed. So I applied for a job as a Fed, and I do science. You can be a scientist working as a Fed, by the way. So I applied for the job, and I anticipated it being what I had, been accustomed to seeing on TV. So on TV, you see things like the FBI, and they flash their badge and they jump in front of, the person and say, "Freeze, FBI," or something like super dramatic. And so that's the vision that I had in the back of my mind, honestly, for a long time until I became a Fed. And it was nothing like that. So the joke was on me. I did have a badge, which I still have to this day. I can use it to identify myself, but it's not nearly as dramatic as what I had envisioned. Um, that being said, I absolutely love my job being a Fed because, like I said before, I work as an industrial hygienist and I'm able to save people's lives. I'm able to tell them about the science behind these chemicals in the workplace and how some of these chemicals, even though they may be chemicals you see in your household, because you're working with them for 8 hours out of the day, they actually pose greater risks to your health than you think. So these are some of the things that I like to communicate. And people are not aware of this. They'll say, oh, well, I have this in my cabinet at home. I use it all the time to clean. What's the big deal? Oh, it's a big deal because when you're at work, it's probably touching your skin for 8 hours out of the day, or you're probably inhaling it for 8 hours out of the day. And that can have very drastic and detrimental effects on I say detrimental. Hopefully, everyone watching knows what detrimental is, but it's something really, really bad. It
Yes.
can have a really, really bad effect on your health, even if not right away, but later on in life.
Wow. And I think that's so important too. You're not only are you solving these problems, but you're educating people because science literacy and learning about science never stops, even as a
Yep,
grown up. And it's hard for a grown up to know every single little thing. So having someone like you teaching people about these different chemicals and the safety is so important.
absolutely. Yes, I agree.
So you love what you do, and I love. It's funny how your perspective of what you thought a Fed wasn't what you imagined, but you still love your job.
I
But
do.
what experiences in your life led you to this career and all the amazing things you do in STEM?
That's another great question. So, my desire has always been to make science simple. As a matter of fact, when I was a student, I had a chemistry teacher who always somehow seemed to be able to break down very difficult science concepts and make it seem so easy and so understandable. I admired him very much. And then when I got a degree in chemistry, so when I graduated with a chemistry degree, I felt that I had a certain obligation or I was, committed to doing the same for other students. So it started out with students and then it really extended to the broader community. So explaining things like chemistry and STEM and science in the workplace and safety and health hazards. And so I ended up becoming a chemistry professor. So I'm an adjunct chemistry professor, which just means that I teach chemistry part time, but I'm also a safety and health professional, as I mentioned before, where I communicate science to workers, to employers, to people who are unions, organizations, government agencies, things like that. And again, my goal is usually always to enable them to understand that you don't necessarily need an advanced science degree or STEM degree to really understand the basis of science, because you mentioned earlier, like science is all around us. It's not going anywhere. And so all we need to do is really understand the basic language. It's kind of like learning a language. I think I've said this in other conversations I've had with people about science, but if you understand the basic language of science, it starts to make so much more sense. And that's kind of the basis of how I learned and fell in love with chemistry specifically. But science in general, it's all around us. And if we can look at things and just maybe even ask ourselves a question like, hey, this peanut butter sandwich I'm eating, what's the science in that? Like simple things like that, because there's science in there. I actually worked, a funny quick story. I worked in a lab where they created a reference material. It actually is called a standard reference material for peanut butter. So imagine people who work in the peanut butter industry and they make these different brands of peanut butter. There are different levels and components of things within peanut butter that are standardized, which means they have to meet specific concentrations or amounts. And so when you make it in your company, you need to compare it to something else that tells you if you're hitting the marks. And so there's a government agency that makes a reference material, so something that you can reference or refer to. And they make peanut butter. They make standard reference materials for all sorts of things. Peanut butter just so happens to be one of them. So I didn't even think about this before while preparing for this interview, but that's a really good example. If you look at a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and you ask yourself, what's the science in that? There's a lot of science in peanut butter. So that's an example of, really thinking about how to communicate science and relate it to things that are around us every single day.
3 things about soap you may or may not already know. Soap has been around for a very long time. The first invention of soap was most likely made out of animal fat, ashes, and other types of natural substances. It may not have been used to wash people, but wash other things like materials, clothing, and even used as some forms of medicine. Today, soap is made from a different form of chemistry, or mixing chemicals together. This is called saponification. Fats and sodium hydroxide are mixed together to create a substance form of glycerol. From there, different things can be added like colors and different nice smelling scents that we know today. My favorite scent is lavender. What about you? Soap is typically found in a couple of forms, such as liquid soap and bar soap. How does soap get things clean? The soap molecules find those oily, dirty molecules and wrap themselves around those dirty molecules. It then sucks in that oil and dirt in the middle of its molecules, and then water is used to help wash those all away. So when soap is cleaning, that is its own science experiment. Did you know these 3 things about soap? Pretty cool, right? Loving the STEM Career Quest podcast and want more? Join the STEM Career Quest Club. Perfect for teachers, homeschool parents, or families looking to add more educational opportunities during school breaks. Inside, you get access to a private community of other STEM Career Quest listeners, comprehension guides for each episode, teaching slides for each episode where it is broken up into chunks so you can listen in smaller segments, related STEM activities you can complete with simple materials, 1 monthly virtual STEM field trip, and more. Join the club at stemcareerquestpodcast.com/club. That's great to know. And yeah, who would think with peanut butter, it is like a whole science experiment
It is.
in itself, and all the chemicals. Good, there's good chemicals, but all the things that go into making peanut butter. That's so
Right.
cool. So you also mentioned that, so depending on your passions and all of that, there's other STEM careers that you wanted to share about, and we would love to hear what you have come up with.
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually grab my book because it's actually sitting right here next to me.
Perfect.
And you've probably seen this on my social media pages, but I wrote a book, a children's book. This is what it's called. It's called Building My Self-Esteem in Science. And it's the word STEAM is actually spelled unconventionally. It's ESTEAM. So it's a play on words. So normally we spell esteem ESTEEM. And so all the letters of STEAM are part of science, technology, engineering, art, and math. So it's the acronym for STEAM. So in this book, it's actually a storybook with lots of cool pictures and a fun story. But being an educator and always wanting to communicate science to students, I thought it was a good idea to include an appendix in the back of this book. And it's called A Few Jobs in Science. And so if I open it up to it, you'll see there's a little table back there, but I can go over a few for you. So it talks about the job type. Let's say you're someone who is really good at sports. Sports is your thing. And you just so happen to be good at science, or, you may want to pursue something in science, and you say to yourself, well, how can I do sports and science? How can I relate the two? There are ways to do that. So in sports, which I list here, you can be a physical therapist. So physical therapists, they study things like kinesiology, or the way that, our bones and joints and things all move and are connected. They study anatomy and physiology. They also do chemistry, pathology. biomechanics. So, maybe thinking about things like prosthetics and how, those things work. And so these things are all interrelated. And so having a sports background, you actually understand the way an athlete moves, the muscles that they're using, how they can condition their muscles when they get hurt, the different types of exercises that they can do. So all of these things can work together. So that's sort of like one extreme example that's like unconventional. We don't really think about sports and think science immediately, right? Um, Another example I like to share is law enforcement. So law enforcement, I think the first thing that comes to mind sometimes is police officer. My son always says he wants to be a police officer because he sees it a lot in the shows that he watches, firefighters, police officers, amazing careers. But did you know that in law enforcement, there's also a possibility to do STEM if you wanted to? And so that's what I tell students sometimes. So you can work in law enforcement if you wanted to. You can be an investigator. So you can probably work in the forensics department. So if there's like a crime scene and they need someone to analyze some of the evidence that they found at the crime scene, you can be that scientist and you would still be working in law enforcement. You would just be doing the science component. But how cool would that be to be able to analyze evidence in a crime? And, there are so many other things, like there are food inspectors who work in law enforcement. They go into, establishments, maybe a bakery or a restaurant, and they can test the food to ensure that it's being cooked at the right temperature or that it doesn't have any, I don't know, bacteria and germs, and the people, the customers are not going to be exposed to those things. So, I mean, you name it, honestly, if you name an industry, there probably is a science or a STEM component to it. You just haven't been exposed to it yet.
That's funny you mentioned a forensic scientist because in episode 3, we did have a forensic
That's
scientist
so
who helped
awesome.
solve crimes.
That is so
Yeah.
cool.
Yes, but you also gave me a lot of ideas of other people I need to find and interview. So
Mhm.
stay tuned because I didn't even think about some of those careers and I'm so excited to find them for us.
Yes, absolutely.
So, along with that, what advice do you have for kids who would want to do something similar to what you do? And you do so many amazing things, but what advice do you have?
So yeah, for all the things that I do, I mean, I could probably sit and write down a list of tips or advice for each of the careers or hats that I wear in STEM. But if I wanted to keep it a little bit more broad or general, I would say start with education. So education is very important because it sets the foundation for what you want to do. You learn sort of how to think creatively. The courses that you take, the classes that you take are designed to help you to think like a scientist or to think like an engineer. So, education is important. And, I say courses that you take, but actually I'm going to backtrack on that because you don't often need a formal education in a particular STEM field to be knowledgeable or to acquire knowledge in that area. So we know that there are lots of self-help help books that people read. You go to the library, you see there are so many books where you can read about all kinds of STEM professions and, educate yourself in these areas. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a course, but if you do take a course, it does help you to sort of remain more structured. But if you, in fact, want to do these things on your own, I highly recommend it as well. Not just books, but there are articles, journal articles, peer reviewed journals, magazine articles. You can read, there are so many things. You can go to science fairs. Um, there's so many ways that you can acquire or gather the information that you need to be able to start to think like a scientist. So in addition to your education, I also am very big on internships. And for the older students, internships make sense to them because it just means that they're spending some time doing a job in a field or an area that they like, but they're not necessarily getting paid. It's just like getting the experience. For younger kids, that might look more like job shadowing. So they may understand that a little bit better. Job shadowing is similar to going to work with a grown up and literally standing in their shadow. So like 1 foot or 1 step behind them and just observing what they do throughout the day, asking questions, maybe taking some notes. You still get to experience what it's like to be that professional. But the difference between job shadowing and internship is as an intern, you typically get to do a lot more. You get to be a part of the group, whereas a job shadowing or a job shadower sort of, like I said, sits in the shadows, then stands a little bit back and lets them do their work. But either of those two, I think, are very valuable in helping you, build your career in STEM. And the final thing that I'll say is building your network and connecting. That's very big, not just in STEM, but I think in so many professions. But what that means is, I mentioned earlier, going to science fairs. I think that's an amazing way to build your network. I was at a science fair this past weekend as a judge, but I mean, I connected with so many other STEM professionals at my level and students who are doing such amazing work across the county where I live in all different areas of STEM. I mean, there were physics projects, chemistry projects. They gave me some ideas for projects that I might want to pursue myself. So it's a really cool way to see what else is out there. So if you have an opportunity to go to a science fair, even if you're not presenting, I highly encourage that you do that as a student. But if you also have an opportunity to connect with a STEM professional, so someone who your teacher might invite to your class to talk, or you may have seen something in the news and there's an opportunity to reach out to the person to ask questions. Hey, type up an email and send it and say you're interested, or see what your local library or community centers have to offer when it comes to STEM. Those are amazing ways to network and to stay connected and see what opportunities are out there. There may also be, now that summer's coming up, STEM and science camps in the summer. I've seen quite a few come home with one of my sons in his backpack about signing him up. So I know there are lots of opportunities coming up. And so that's another great way to stay connected and to get involved in STEM from a very early age.
These are such practical tips and ideas. And I'm sure any of our guests that we've had here, including you, I'm putting you out there, would love to hear from you guys if you're more interested in any about any of these careers and opportunities that you've heard from people. And I love how there's that whole journey you shared with kids and different ways as they get older, what they can do in those years and also now in their earlier years. But
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you so much again for sharing all your expertise and all the amazing work that you do. And we loved having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast chatting with you, and I'm excited to, help the next generation of STEMinists or scientists and engineers, mathematicians, technologists, you name. I'm excited to really contribute to their growth and their success. And so it's really an awesome opportunity to be part of your show and to talk about these things that the students can hopefully benefit from.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again.
You're very welcome.
Hope you've been listening carefully to today's episode, my questies. Now it is time for me to reveal the answers to today's episode quest. Question number 1 was, what does Yasmine help protect people from in the workplace? Different kinds of hazards or things that are dangerous. Question number 2, true or false? Yasmine has a special badge for her job. True. In her role as an industrial hygienist, she has a special badge because she is a Fed or federal agent. She doesn't use it very often, but she could if she needed to. And question number 3, what does Yasmine say is like learning a language? Learning science is like learning a language. The more you learn about science and the world around you, the more things are going to make sense in how they actually work. How did you do on the questions? Need a little bit of help? Make sure to join our STEM Career Quest Club, where these questions are included for you to follow along and other fun things to help you make this podcast more fun to listen to. I create every single one of these guides and know what is in them, and I get so excited when kids like you are using them to help learn more about these STEM careers and how STEM is used in our real worlds. Make sure to check out the link of this club in the show notes. Loving the STEM Career Quest podcast? Want to be featured on the show? Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and tell us what you love about it. Maybe you'll be featured on our next episode. What is something new today that you learned about being an industrial hygienist? Is this type of STEM career that you might want to explore more? Even if it isn't, it is so awesome to learn about all of these different careers to help us understand the world better and how our world works. Thank you so much for being here, and I love helping you along in your STEM journey. I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the STEM Career Quest podcast. Grab your free episode badge, connect with today's guest, follow us on social media, join the club, and more. Find it all on our website at stemcareerquestpodcast.com.